So I have no idea what I'm going to do with my life now moving forward. The Texans are out of the playoffs. College football season is winding down. I don't get to watch the Lions hoist up a Lombardi trophy, which was really shocking in itself. Matt House, you're never allowed back in Baton Rouge after last night's performance. So I guess I'm going to talk to you guys on the internet. Welcome on into Sunday Funday right here on SEC Unfiltered, presented by FanDuel. Make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification, and subscribe to the channel because we talk college football every single day. Download the podcast version of the show wherever you get your podcast listening systems. Follow us on the socials, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at SEC Unfiltered. If you want to follow me for back and forth banner, it's at Mr. Cole Thompson on Twitter and Instagram. And check out all of our great work found at secunfiltered.com. Once again, Sunday Funday is presented to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/SECU to join today and get started with a $300 in bonus bets whenever you play your first $5 lineup. $5, $300 in bonus bets. What better to do than go ahead and play with FanDuel, especially with the college football playoff winding on down and the NFL postseason just heating on up. Jam-packed show today. Chris Phillips decided to piss a lot of you off by saying what was going to be his quarterback rankings in way too early power rankings. So I'm giving you my tier rankings for the SEC 2024 season. Who is the next South Carolina in 2025? Sarkeesian gets a brand new contract. What do we make of it? And let's talk about some of my favorite transfers. Not the best transfers, not the ones that are going to be household names in college football next year, but my favorite transfers, the ones that I think are really good fits for certain programs in the SEC that might eventually play a major role in how many wins a team gets next year. But we're not going to waste any time. This is a jam-packed show. Real quickly, if you are tuned in, make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification, subscribe to the channel. It takes like an all 2-minute feed. All right, let's not waste any time. Tier list. This again is my tier list. We're going to go in 5 different categories. First one, championship. Second one, contender. Next one, good, solid, you'll take it. Next one, inconsistent. Last one, burn it down. Burn it down. Simple point. We'll start there. Don't even look at the film. Just throw it away. Don't go back to it. Let it simmer. Stay far, far, far as much as possible. And make sure that you just leave it in the past before you go into 2025. Mississippi State takes the cake here. Season was over after losing to Toledo. No SEC team should ever lose to a group of 5 school, let alone one in Toledo that wasn't even the kings of the MAC this year. And it really was over after Blake Shapen got hurt against Florida. This was a team that had missing pieces offensively. It never had a stable offensive line. The defense was beyond hit and miss. In fact, you had to shield your eyes and throw a TVMA logo up half the time because if you just knew it was going to be blowout after blowout, they started to lose a little bit of confidence. The 2 things I will say is having a stable wide receiver in Kevin Coleman at least gave Michael Van Buren a veteran weapon in the passing attack. And he won't be there next year, but neither will Michael Van Buren because both went to other SEC schools. And they started to find an identity on the ground with the rushing attack. They recently just brought in a guy that I'm going to mention later in the show, but I think you know who we're talking about. He comes from Montgomery, Alabama. He's a really solid player. Jeff Lebby built his identity in year 1. Now he's got to be able to have the players to enhance it. But please, just throw out the film. Don't even look at what happened in 2025. It was a swing and a miss. Start building for next season. Kentucky. Really strong offseason. This is like one of those times whenever you see someone say, hey, we're going to make a remake of a movie. And everyone's like, we didn't really ask for that. But then you see the star-studded cast and you see all the pieces that are in line. You see who's backing it, who's funding it. And you go, okay, well, I'll give it a shot. That was Kentucky's offseason. Really strong. Brought in some quality players. Guys like Pop Johnson from Georgia, Brock Vandergrift, Jamori Macklin. They had a veteran defensive presence. This was a team that in years past, every 3 years, was known for getting double-digit wins. And they proceeded to manage a close call against Georgia after being embarrassed by South Carolina. They went on the road in 2 weeks to upset Ole Miss. And then they proceeded to some point in the way of traveling back to Lexington, take a detour, and never make it back to Kroger Field. 6 double-digit losses, 1 conference win, albeit one of the best wins of the year for them. Never were able to find an identity on offense, especially with the ground game. You never really had a quality quarterback play with Brock Vandegrift, so much so that he is retired from football. And Mark Stoops is now facing a lot of pressure going into 2025. This is a coach that many people have said kind of fell off the wagon whenever he was at least committed to going to Texas A&M. Things didn't really pan on out. And so now it feels like the buy-in from the locker room is no longer there. They haven't been crushing it in the transfer portal. Made some really strong moves with players that I think could be good fits for the system. but they're going to be paddling upstream once again in 2025. I don't know if this is correctable. In fact, for my money, of all the teams that we talk about who are sitting in the bottom cellar with little to no hope, Kentucky feels like kind of the front face line of all of that. Inconsistent. These were teams that were good at times. They were bad at times. You never really saw a true focal identity. It didn't define what their record was, but still, you expected better from them. Oklahoma falls in this category. You knew that Oklahoma was going to be facing a little bit of an uphill battle because of what they lost in the year before, whether it was Jeff Levy going to Starkville, losing Dylan Gabriel to Oregon, multiple wide receivers decided to go to the pros, brand new offensive line. But I don't think many people thought, okay, well, Oklahoma's just going to fall off a path. Oklahoma's not going to be around anymore. No, they weren't. I mean, just like we talked about with Nebraska not too long ago, making the jump to the Big Ten, that was Oklahoma. New offensive line, brand new weapons, and most of them were injured half the time. A new quarterback that didn't fit in your offensive coordinator system. A bit of a panic move after week 4 to shift on over from Jackson Arnold to Michael Hawkins. The injuries began to stockpile. It looked like a laundry list of who's who every Wednesday when that injury report came on out. You never had consistent play calling. It led to the firing of Luttrell. You had 2 offensive coordinators working with Jackson Arnold, who at that point had kind of probably checked out and said, I'm not the guy. It was year 1 of pure hell out in Norman. And just for the crap cake on top of what was 2024, you lost to a military school in the Armed Forces Bowl. I don't really care what anybody has to say. I support our troops. I love our troops. An SEC team should never be losing to a militant school. Ever happen. But there was a positive in all this. You beat Alabama, knocked them out of the college football playoff, year 1, I might add in, and you landed probably the best offensive coordinator-quarterback combo that Norman has seen since Baker Mayfield was working with Lincoln Riley for 2025. John Mateer and Ben Arbuckle, hopefully they can turn the tides. Hopefully they can bring in new life. They can bring in a new ambiance for the squad because of it's Oklahoma football. 6-7 will never cut it. They don't care what are the excuses down there. Auburn was masquerading as a bad team all year. Auburn, honestly, when you look back, had some close calls. They played really well at times against Oklahoma. They played really well at times against Arkansas. They were driving. They had consistency at the wide receiver position. They had consistency when it came to the defense. They're going to finish with a top 50 unit in almost every single category, but they lead the country in one. Dumb turnovers. And that ultimately cost them a shot of going to a bowl game. That cost them a shot to get multiple wins. Yes, they got the quadruple overtime victory against Texas A&M. The voodoo magic of Jordan Hare was going to come out at some point this year. But it was a turnover-prone team. Also, the play design of Hugh Freeze was frankly intolerable in moments. How many times are you watching back if you're an Auburn fan and you remember they couldn't run the football to save their life? Not because they didn't want to or they couldn't. It was because of Hugh Freeze said, I'm going to go trust the passing attack. I'm going to go force feed Peyton Thorne to get balls out to Keandre Lambert-Smith, to Perry Thompson, to Cam Coleman. There was never a consistent ground game. And you had a solid running back in Jarquez Hunter that time and time again showed you, I'm actually supposed to be the bell cow bruiser of this roster. I'm supposed to be the focal point of your offense. Nope, we're going to throw that to the wayside. Auburn's been killing it in the transfer portal. They're going to finish with another top 10 recruiting class underneath Hugh Freeze. Here's the problem that I have, ladies and gentlemen. You can have all of the pantry filled to the brim with sweets, with treats, with good food. But if you don't do anything with it, it's going to spoil. It's going to rot. You're just going to throw it on out. And by throwing it on out, it means your head coach is going to be fired and all these players are going to go to the transfer portal. So you got to start actually showing that the players that you're bringing in, they're worth holding on to. Eric Singleton, especially the number 1 wide receiver recruit. Arkansas, Taylor Green was a roller coaster 2 a.m. cigarette that you just can't quit when you're drunk. Honestly, when he played well, Arkansas was on point. Arkansas was one of the more fascinating, fun teams in college football this year. And they showed you it with a massive win over Tennessee, a Tennessee team that was solid defensively, that many people thought was good enough to compete for an SEC championship. They also played really well against Auburn. They played really well against Mississippi State. They closed out the year against Texas Tech, and they dominated the Red Raiders, a Red Raiders team that I might also add in is killing it in the transfer portal right now. But they also had some bad losses. The second half miscues against Oklahoma State, that's one that you're just going to have to shield your eyes. The game against Texas A&M in the fourth quarter, that's another one where you just got to have to look like this, and then you just kind of open up, and then you just don't want to look anymore because the poor execution, the enabling of tackling, the bad coverage, really, really bad losses to Ole Miss, LSU. You should have won the Missouri game. You didn't pull away in the Missouri game, so you were inconsistent at best. The problem is that you do bring back your quarterback. You do bring back your offense coordinator. Bobby Petrino, fit like a glove. Really overall solid unit, top to bottom. However, there just doesn't feel like right now there's a lot of piece around it. One of the more stockpiling teams that lost talent to the transfer portal. I don't know how much better it's going to get underneath Sam Pittman moving forward. Let's move into the if one thing changed category. Now, these are teams I figured if one thing changed for you, just one thing was different, maybe, just maybe, we're talking about you as a 9-win team, as a 10-win team, as a team that's considered in that dark horse running for the college football playoff. Yeah, Texas A&M falls in this category. The pass defense prevented better results. That was the only thing it prevented this year. Go back and watch the game against USC, and you'll understand exactly what I mean. Inconsistent quarterback play from Marcel Reed and Connor Wigman, whether it was because of injury, whether it was because of game planning, whether it was because of not a good fit in Colin Klein's system, didn't really help the case. They had a signature win against LSU. The second that they moved over from 15 to 10, you watched as this team gained momentum. And then they proceeded to give that momentum right on over to South Carolina. And the worst part was it wasn't even in October. They had a very solid defensive front seven. They were making plays left and right inside the trenches. Nick Scorton, Shamar Stewart, Shamar Turner, what you had in Torian York. Your offensive line wasn't a turnstile underneath a brand new offensive line coach in Adam Cushing. Tommy Moffitt was able to keep this team for the most part upright. But still, you just had your insecurities. Now, if I told you year one of Mike Elko, this is the last 8-4 season. This is the last year that you're going to hear the 8-4 jokes. How would you feel? Well, you'd probably be like, well, 9-3, 10-2, college football playoff contender. We'll take that 10 out of 10. Unfortunately, now you got to be able to build off of those pieces. There was a lot of negativities because here's the problem. A lot of Texas A&M fans, from what I'm hearing from most people that I speak to, they're upset that they looked so good against LSU. They looked awesome against the Florida team. They ran for over 245 yards and nearly ran Billy Napier out of the Sunshine State. But yet then they had bad performances against Texas. Then they looked awful against South Carolina. Then you basically can't even turn on the film and allow Lincoln Riley to gloat that he's 2-0 against the SEC this year. That's where a lot of teams feel like, that's where a lot of Aggies feel like that's the negative around this A&M program. But they're coming in the transfer portal. They're going to finish with a top 15 recruiting class. Let's see if year two of Mike Elko is better than year one. Florida, sloppy start, strong finish. If you were to tell me that after the Texas A&M game, with a loss to Miami, in the fashion that they lost, that Billy Napier was going to save his job, you were crazy. You come back from the future, and then you go on down and say, hey, Cole, here's the deal. Billy Napier is going to potentially even get a contract extension in 2026. No, he's not, because he's going to be fired. Where is it? Is that Florida? Because that certainly is not going to be out in Gainesville. Well, then they decided to move to the QB of the future. You lose Graham Mertz to the torn ACL. DJ Lagway balls on out. He had his moments. He had his moments of freshman mistakes, but those are correctable over time. In fact, I would say that most of the options that you have currently on the roster would have been awful, and Lagway ended up being the best thing for you because it finally stopped this quarterback switching formation. It just allowed you to play with number two as your number one guy. And when he started gaining some confidence, the team started gaining some confidence. There was never any buyout of this Florida team, which is why Scott Strickland said right before the Georgia game, hey, we're not moving off of him. Or after the Texas, right before the Texas game, we're not moving off him. He's our guy. We're locked in. We believe in him in the future. And guess what? There was reason to. The Florida game kind of added a spark. You weren't going to beat Texas with Aiden Warner, so just throw that one to the wayside. You get a signature win against LSU, a top 15 LSU team, and then you knock Ole Miss out of the college football playoff. You've done a good job on the transfer portal trail. You've done a good job building a top 10 recruiting class. People like Billy down in Gainesville. He's not a guy that people are saying, oh, well, he's in over his head and he's micromanaging everything. No, they really think that he is the right fit for the culture. But just the one thing changed was not a sloppy start against Miami. If you got a win over a Texas A&M team that was probably a little ahead of its skis in that week 3 performance, maybe you're finishing 9-3 and we're talking about you as at least a top 25 team to close out 2024. LSU, there was never a consistent game plan, offensively, defensively. And you know what? I can understand where you come from whenever you're talking about at least the defensive side, because Blake Baker came on in, he got paid a crap ton of money. He wanted to be the long-term dude. He's got to get his guys. They're doing that in the transfer portal. But the offense was hit and missed. The offense wasn't able to show up at all on the ground game this year. You had one solid performance from Caden Durham. And I'm not saying that losing star running backs such as John Emery wasn't a big deal. What I'm saying is that the fact was you never were able to be a multifaceted offense. You weren't. And so you put so much pressure on Garrett Nussmeier to deliver. He was good. He wasn't great, especially against ranked teams. 8 touchdowns versus 8 interceptions. The secondary was all over the place. You lose a guy in Harold Perkins, and your defense gets slightly better for a moment before it comes crashing on down. You play close in matches that probably you shouldn't have, but at least you end the year on a high note with a double-digit victory in the Texas Bowl over Baylor. And I might also add in, Brian Kelly got it. Loud and clear, watching as his former school was playing for a national championship on Monday. Yeah, I'm never going to feel this way again. We're going to put our money where our mouth is. We're going to take all of the resources that we had in the Bryce Underwood kid. And believe me, they had resources in the Bryce Underwood kid. And they're using it in the transfer portal. Bringing in guys like Barry Brown, bringing in guys like Patrick Payton, bringing in Josh Thompson. They're going to be right in the hunt next season in the college football postseason picture. Now, solid season. We'll take it. We'll take it means we're okay with this record. Could have been better, could have been worse, but you know what? We're not complaining. Vanderbilt falls in this one. And you're probably saying, Cole, does that mean that you think Vanderbilt is better than everybody else out there? No, not at all. Not even remotely close. Vanderbilt had its moments of lulls. It had its moments of triumphs. The victory over Alabama single-handedly is one of the best performances by Clark Lee and one of the best performances in college football this year. But for Vanderbilt, getting to a bowl game and finishing the year off 7-6 is a win in itself. Vanderbilt hasn't been to a bowl game since 2018. They've been to 3 bowl games since 2010. This is an offense that has been docile at best underneath multiple different coaches since James Franklin left for Happy Valley. And on top of that, they finally found a dude that people want to rally behind. And the Commodores are an awesome team. But the fan base is fantastic. They love SEC Unfiltered. For all of you watching, thank you so much for joining us. They have a belief that they are going to play their version of football and you can slow it down, but you're not going to be able to contain it. That's just the bottom line. Diego Pavia, he's coming back for another year. Eli Stowers is coming back for another year. They nearly finished with 8 wins because they went to double overtime against Missouri. They beat Virginia Tech week 1. And honestly, if not for the mental mistakes against Georgia State, we're talking about potentially a historic season out in Nashville. For their standard, we'll take that 10 times out of 10. Bowl eligibility, guaranteeing that we're bringing in several recruits that we didn't think we had a shot of actually landing, and making sure that we're still capitalizing in the transfer portal. Nobody is going to complain about that. And nobody should be complaining about Missouri season either. With everything that went wrong this year, from Brady Cook's injury to the limited help in the passing game, from the drop balls, from the inconsistent play calling, from replacing ample talent on the offensive and defensive side, from switching coordinators from one of the best in the business to a guy who last year wasn't even calling plays. The fact that Missouri was able to get to 10 wins is, in my opinion, one of the best coaching jobs in the SEC for 2024. It truly is. Eli Drinkowitz has set a precedent standard now in Como. He understands there are expectations that we are going to meet. And if you don't want to be a part of this team that can elevate our status, don't be a Tiger. Because you want to know what? They fought back against South Carolina. And that was one of the better games they had all year. They fought back against an Iowa team. And they got a victory in a bowl game against a Big Ten squad, where a lot of people right now are saying, who's better, the SEC or the Big Ten? They implemented brand new talent, whether it was young up-and-comers or whether it was transfer portal players like Toriano Pride, like Johnny Walker. They were able to still be a top 20 defense. And much like when we talk about teams like South Carolina and Ole Miss, and even you could throw in probably every few years Kentucky, this is a team that now believes we can actually go on a run for the college football playoff. It won't come every single year, but we'll be able to get the job done. You're going to miss out on players like Theo Wees, Luther Bird, and Brady Cook. You got to upgrade in terms of quarterback. You got to upgrade in terms of running back after losing both Marcus Carroll and Nate Noel. But I like some of the names that they brought in. I think that they're doubling down on saying there is a certain precipice that we have currently out at Farote Field. We're not going to sit by idly anymore. We believe that 10 wins should be an expectation and a standard. They're starting to figure it out in the transfer portal, and they're starting to double down on saying we're willing to make that swing for a big-time player that didn't work out at one school because we know that we can work out at our school. Alabama, this was just a team that was too quarterback dependent. Honestly, if you look back, Alabama was always based off of simply what did Jalen Milroe do? He had a good game, Alabama usually won. He had a bad game, Alabama usually lost. Don't believe me? Look at the second half against Tennessee. Look at the game against Oklahoma. The Michigan game. That needs to be burned and forgotten about because you can never play that way. And the reason why I don't have Alabama in the contender category is because of that performance. In my opinion, losing to Oklahoma on the road in Norman, that's a concern for year one because of how bad that offense was. But at least you can say players were still buying on into what Brent Venables was selling. You had nothing for this Wolverine team. Their starting cornerback was out. 3 of their 4 starting defensive linemen were out. Their starting middle linebacker was out. 1 of their starting safety was out. Their starting tight end was out. Both of their lead running backs were out. And they didn't have a quarterback in the second half because Davis Warren hurt himself. And yet you still looked like the inferior team. Now, here's the good news. There was a lot of positives. You got a win over Georgia. You got a win over Missouri. You got a win over South Carolina. So you beat quality teams this year, and your defense finally turned the corner after that Vanderbilt game. Honestly, if you look back, that was the wake-up call that Kane Womack needed. They finished top 20 in scoring, top 20 in third down conversions, top 20 in total yards. A lot of these players are coming back. There's a reason why whenever somebody says Alabama, the dynasty, the run is over, I say, well, the run was over in 2020. This Nick Saban-led roster that we remember, yeah, that's not around anymore. But you look at this team, guys like Deontay Lawson coming on back, guys like LT Overton coming on back, guys like Brian Williams, Jaden Mbakwe, Jaden Roberts. They have an identity, and they also believe that these are players that can be the foundation for Kalen DeBoer's team. So a ton of returning talent. They're going to be in a good spot next year. They got to upgrade certain spots of the offensive line. They're finishing with a top-tier recruiting class, number 2 in the country. No, Kalen DeBoer does not need to be on the hot seat. Let's go ahead and temper our expectations out in Tuscaloosa. South Carolina, nobody wanted to play this team down the stretch. They were probably the most fun team in the SEC to close out 2024. 4 ranked wins, especially in no Beamer, as it's now going to be trademarked. Shane Beamer, let's go on that, actually, right now. Nobody was more improved from week 1 to week 13 than Lenora Sellers. The rivalry game was probably the best of all rivalry games that weekend out in Death Valley. The back and forth blows from Cade Klubnik to Lenora Sellers for Sellers to take a third down run and punch it on in. Then you get Terrence Knighton to get an interception to close out the year with a 9-3 season. Exceptional defensive play underneath Clayton White this year. Kyle Kennard was him. Nicky Manwari was phenomenal. Tonka Hemingway, Knighton, Kilgore, and Shane Beamer has now earned the SEC and I would say America's respect. If you just have a problem with Shane Beamer, it's your fault. It has nothing to do with anything other than preconceived notions of the past, because Shane Beamer, once again, has shown everybody that he is not only over exceeding expectations, he's setting a standard. So we need to stop with saying every single year, oh, well, look at what South Carolina did. Look at what South Carolina was able to accomplish. They knew they were going to accomplish that because the buy-in from the culture that's set by the man in command is expecting those type of results. So start buying into what Shane Beamer is selling, because this is a team that's going to be dangerous. They may not have the same type of talent defensively next year. They may be missing some offensive pieces. But the guys that they have brought in the transfer portal, if you talk to people around the industry, they are very impressed with the names, the type of production, the way they fit in the system. And that might be enough to send South Carolina to a college football playoff. Plus, they have a really good foundation headlined by Sellers, Nick Harbor, Jalen Kilgore, Josiah Thompson, and an All-American Dylan Stewart. If not for a loss to Illinois, they probably would have been in the contender category. I love the Cardiac Cox. You should too. Contenders. This means that if you put them in the college football playoff, they could have made some noise, especially if they had everything working for them. Tennessee falls in this line. Tennessee made the college football playoff. They lost their starting running back in Dylan Sampson, and then they proceeded to get boat raced by Ohio State, but I'm just going to call a spade after watching what happened with Texas, watching what happened with Oregon, and what I expect to happen on Monday night. Nobody was beating that Ohio State team. Ohio State played an A-plus game in 2 of their 3 performances, and they dominated. Quality competition. The defense delivered 10 times to secure a playoff bid for Josh Heupel. 3 times it didn't. And you know what? In all 3 times, they lost the game. They were top 10 in almost every single metric. They have star talent when it comes to guys like Boo Carter, Arian Carter. Sorry about that. Really solid depth pieces. They just re-signed Tim Banks to a brand new deal, which I don't understand why people are disagreeing with that. I know the Arkansas game was bad. I know the Ohio State game was bad. Do me a favor. How are you upgrading from that? Dylan Sampson was snubbed a spot for the Doak Walker finalist. Sorry, he was. When you average over 125 yards per game and a touchdown, for my money, that probably guarantees you at least a spot in the conversation. He was the stable piece for an offense headlined by Josh Heupel that loves to run the football, and he took a lot of pressure off of Nico to have to deliver in big-time games. The problem is that in the one game that you really needed him, you didn't, because the hamstring kind of bothered him and he wasn't able to play out in Columbus. Nico never took the jump forward. And what I mean by that is that he never took over games. Now, for a redshirt freshman, not a problem. For a guy that you believe can only get better with more time in the system, not a problem. And I believe he can. But the offense never played a four-quarter consistent level on the same page type of football game. Now, there was a bad pass from Nico that led to an interception, but good game by wide receivers. Or you saw great throws from Nico, especially down the stretch, like in the Georgia game, like in the Vanderbilt game, even in the game against Ohio State. But they were terrible drops, great coverage. The offensive line was hit and miss at times. If it gave up 4 sacks, the game ended in a loss. There are people out there that saying that Josh Heupel is not right for the job. For starters, stop what you're doing. Put down the pipe. You don't need to be having any more of that stuff. You don't need it in your system. You need to get rid of it, in my opinion. This is a guy that, once again, has led you to 2 double-digit win seasons in the last 4 years and a college football playoff bid. He's finishing with top 15 recruiting classes, and the players that he's bringing in fit his culture. Do you remember the days of Derek Dooley? Do you remember the Lane Kiffin year? Do you remember Butch Jones? Do you remember that? Do you remember Jeremy Pruitt? Yeah, we're going to stay away from all the negativity surrounding a guy like Josh Heupel until moving forward. Now we move into I have one more. I didn't want to do this one. I really didn't, because I thought I'd put them a little bit higher, but it's Ole Miss. At its peak, Ole Miss was a top 7 team in the country. I know what you're going to say. Cole, they lost 3 games. I know. They still finished with the number 3 scoring offense in the country, the number 2 passing offense, the number 2 total offense, the number 7 offense in explosive plays, number 3 in scoring defense, number 2 in run defense, number 14 in total defense, number 11 in third down conversions, number 9 in opponents' third down conversions, and they got to another double-digit win season. Jackson Dart balled on out most of the year. They had a stable run game, even though they didn't have a lead running back with Quinshawn Judkins going on over to Columbus. They made up for the lost production of Trey Harris. Unfortunately, they just lost games that they couldn't afford to lose. And the worst part is they had chances to close out on every single one of them. 4th and 7, Barry and Brown, 56 yards from Brock Vandergrift. 4th and 5, Death Valley, you're up by a score. Nuss finds Aaron Anderson at the back of the end zone, and now you're going to overtime. And if the Rebels made the playoffs, I'll be completely real, they would have been a more dangerous team than Tennessee. They would have been as dangerous as Texas. They probably would have been at the same level as Georgia after beating Georgia in its own backyard. The problem is that you can't reward a 3-loss team with the bad losses that they had. And what you can say is of all the 9-3 teams, we weren't talking enough about Ole Miss. We should have been talking about Ole Miss, because when they played in their bowl game, they absolutely delivered down in Jacksonville. And they proved to the country, yeah, they mean business moving forward. There is a new standard set underneath Lane Kiffin in Oxford, and I still believe that Ole Miss will be right back in this conversation next year. And last but certainly not least, championship teams. These are the teams that were the best, the cream of the crop of the SEC. Number 1, we know who it is. So we're going number 2. It's Texas. Year 1 of the conference, finished with the top-ranked defense, lost to 2 teams 3 times. Quinn Ewers set a career high in passing touchdowns, led his team to an 11-1 finish during the regular season. The defense was great on every single metric. They were able to recoup all of the players lost to the NFL draft via the transfer portal. You saw growth and development from young up-and-coming talents like Colin Simmons and Malik Muhammad. They bring in Andrew Makuba to stabilize their secondary. Jahdae Barron wins the Jim Thorpe Award. They do an excellent job of playing keep away from the other opposing team whenever it's a close call. They force teams to fail inside the red zone. And the only thing that really stopped Texas was Texas. Texas never had a 4-quarter game. They weren't able to run the football efficiently against teams that were better than them, or the teams that they at least lost to. They averaged less than 2.2 yards per play in the game against Georgia and in the game against Ohio State. They had exceptional play calling in matchups that you really needed them to, and then they had some bad play designs against Georgia and Ohio State down in the Cotton Bowl. You saw a great performance from Quinn Ewers to be able to come on back, especially against Arizona State. Maybe that's not a signature win in the eyes of most Longhorn faithful, but I'll tell you what, that is not a Arizona State team in the past. That was a really solid roster that was playing with sheer gusto and determination. And on top of that, you didn't have a 4-quarter game all year outside of the Florida matchup where it wasn't DJ Lagway taking the field, it was Aiden Warner. So there's a lot of things that you can say and nitpick and point out that Texas struggled with in 2024. But then you have to realize year 1, when everyone was complaining about the SEC, year 1 where everyone was saying that the SEC was going to be too much of a challenge for a team like those in Austin, they delivered on every single end. And lo and behold, they're still going to deliver moving forward because they're not losing much when it comes to the proven talent. And they have a great recipe and rapport of talent coming back on in from the transfer portal and from the recruiting trail. So Texas is going to be fine. No questions asked about it. Georgia's top team. And Georgia's top team because they were the top team in the SEC at the end of the year. Now, they had some bad games. They had some really bad games amid injury, suspension, terrible play calling, and underwhelming road losses to Alabama and Ole Miss. They still found a way to claim another conference championship under Kirby Smart. For my money, this is probably his best coaching job he's had since joining the team down in 2016. They were able to wake up for the games they had to. Texas twice, once in Atlanta for the conference championship, the Tennessee matchup. Carson Beck flashed his upside. The Tennessee game is one that when I look back, if I'm a Missouri fan, if I'm a Miami fan, that's the game I'm pointing to and saying, okay, well, I really am excited to see where this direction goes. And in a year where they didn't rank top 10 in every single metric, literally, go look it up. They didn't rank inside the top 25 in most metrics. They still won a conference and they got to 10 victories. They just ran out of juice and lost momentum against a very good, very solid, and very up-tempo and sheer determined Notre Dame team. So it's not like I can sit here and say, when you look at where Georgia was this year, it was a bad season. It's nowhere near Georgia's standard. But if you still told me that somehow they were able to get over the hump and beat Notre Dame, find their way to face off against Penn State, get the same result and to be playing for a national championship this weekend, if Carson Beck doesn't get hurt, I wouldn't doubt it. I don't think anybody should doubt it. You led the country in drops and yet still you won a conference title. What does that say about the internal buy-in of your program? And especially what's going in moving forward. So I look at Georgia, even with a down year in their standard, they still were able to go ahead and get the job done. So those are my teams. Those are my rankings. If you go ahead and disagree with me, please just leave it in the comments section. And also, just remember, this episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel takes the NFL playoffs to the next level. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get a $300 bucks back in bonus bets whenever you win. So it's $300 in bonus bets whenever you just play a $5 lineup. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same game parlays, and so much more. Plus, when you get paid instantly. So win, and money's going right into your pocket. Just visit FanDuel.com/SECU to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/SECU. Make this NFL playoffs an unforgettable one with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Disclaimer, must be 21 and present in select states for Kansas and affiliation for Kansas Star Casino or 18 plus in DC. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued with non-refundable with bonus bets, which expires 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.com/FanDuel.com. Gambling problems, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Chat in Connecticut or visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelp.linema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. Texas gets a brand new deal for Steve Sarkeesian. We're going to talk about that in a minute. I got to get some water. Actually, it's Gatorade. So, Texas offers a brand new deal to Steve Sarkeesian. He's going to be the third highest paid coach in college football after leading his team to back-to-back conference college football playoff semifinal appearances and 2 conference championship appearances. One in the Big 12, one in the SEC. Now, there's a lot of people out there saying, why are you paying Steve Sarkeesian so much money when he still hasn't won the big game? So here's my thought process to you. Go back to remembering the dark days of Texas, or at least the days that you never want to go back to. You know, when Charlie Strong was leading the pack, when Mac Brown was still in over his head and he didn't go out on his terms. He went on the terms of what the actual people around the building said. And then go back and remember to yourself what Steve Sarkeesian has done since that point. You know, since 2009, Texas has had 1 double-digit win season, and they didn't even win the conference championship. Yeah, well, Steve Sarkeesian is 2. Oh, and he also has a Big 12 title, and he just played in year 1 in the SEC for a conference championship. Texas never made the college football playoff. When it was 4 teams, when it was 12 teams, when it was 8 teams, Texas never made the college football playoff underneath Charlie Strong, underneath Tom Herman. Well, Steve Sarkeesian has gone twice to the college football playoff, including a 14 college football playoff. And when they were in the red zone, they were 2 plays away in both instances from at least sending it to overtime and making it a run for Atlanta and Houston. Texas had 2 top 5 recruiting classes underneath Tom Herman. Texas has 2 so far underneath Steve Sarkeesian. On top of that, he has 4 total since joining the Longhorns back in 2021. On top of that, he also has 3 straight winning seasons and bowl game seasons, something that you can't say underneath Charlie Strong and something that was never even a promise fit underneath Tom Herman. And then you look back at where this team is when it comes to proven production. What was the one negative thing surrounding Texas before Steve Sarkeesian and Kyle Flood arrived? The development of the offensive line. And this was a Big 12 offensive line. They weren't sending players to the league. They were never getting guys to actually get looked at for Sunday football in the trenches on the offensive line or on the defensive line. Well, enter Steve Sarkeesian and Kyle Flood, and now you got yourself a guaranteed first-round pick in Kelvin Banks, a guaranteed top 50 pick in Cam Williams, probably going to get at least a top grafted grade for Jake Majors, not to mention what you sent out last year in Tavondre Sweat and in Byron Murphy, what you're going to have in Vernon Broughton and Alfred Collins, the talent that you're continuing to develop, and the buy-in from the culture. You're killing it in the transfer portal, targeting players that actually fit the system that you want to run. Oh, and by the way, your quarterback, the guy that people cannot wait to get rid of, yeah, he's going to go down 3rd all-time in passing yards, passing touchdowns, completion percentage, total passer rating, and he led your team to 2 college football playoff appearances. And the NFL can offer him. You do realize that the jobs that are available in the NFL could match what Texas has. People don't want to believe that the NFL is made of all this money the way that college football is. It's made of more. And you got to realize that ownership is willing to pay out of the pocket for who they want as a head coach. So if somehow Mark Davis out in Las Vegas believes that Steve Sarkeesian will elevate his Las Vegas Raiders team, he's going to make whatever offer Texas has. Here's the problem. It's Texas. There's very few places that are better than that in the NFL, in college football, in just the standard of coaching in general. This is the Longhorn Nation. It's burnt orange on the 40 acres on a Saturday afternoon where resources continue to stockpile on in, where you're able to continuously land premier talent in your own state. And if you miss out on a 4-star, it's not the end of the world. There are very few locations currently that you're going to be able to get better than or upgrade from. Especially when you go to your boosters and say, I need X, Y, and Z, and they smile at you and go, okay, we're going to add that in right now. That's Texas in a nutshell. And you may say, oh, well, Texas hasn't been able to get over the hump. But just because you haven't been able to do it doesn't mean you can't. Everyone wants to focus in so much about people that are looking at what hasn't been accomplished versus what has. Back-to-back double-digit win seasons, college football playoff appearances, top 25 finishes in total offense, top 15 finishes in total defense, conference championship victory, a record set by number 3. Oh, and also 2 playoff wins. And you want to upgrade from that. So here, let me ask you the question. Who comes on in and guarantees you a better success story than Steve Sarkeesian right now? Go ahead, point him out. Who's the guy that you're calling on? Matt Campbell? Yeah, he may beat Oklahoma every single year, but you're probably going 9-3. You're bringing in Lane Kiffin. Is Lane really going to leave at this point when he's already turned down offers from other jobs in the past? Kalen DeBoer, you're at Alabama. They're on the same playing field. Who's the guy that you actually believe can come on in, stabilize Texas the exact same way that Steve Sarkeesian can? But you're upset that you're paying him a little bit more money because he hasn't been able to win a national championship. I know there's a lot of Texas fans out there that don't feel this way, but I saw a lot of negativity surrounding the Steve Sarkeesian contract, and I just don't understand it. When you have something good, you want to sustain it, and it's good in Austin. It's good in Longhorn country. This is a team that is going to finish with a top 5 recruiting class, and you look at the names that left in the portal, nobody is freaking out. Do you want to know why? Because of the players that you recently brought in. Guys that you have at wide receiver, linebacker, defensive back, cornerback, offensive line. Oh, and by the way, the coaches that are currently on staff, they're going to develop them properly. And they're going to send them out to the NFL in 2 or 3 years. And they're all going to be able to say, I learned from the best down in Austin. So anybody who's freaking out about Steve Sarkeesian getting paid $12 million despite not winning a national championship, go ahead and just take a deep exhale. Because I can promise you this, the grass feels greener right now on the opposing side. Oh, we can upgrade and we can get somebody else to come in here and believe in us. Yeah, you can say that, until you actually have to go back and remember what happened when you thought that was going to occur after Mac Brown left and how far you went down the rabbit hole of not being close to BACK when you thought that was a big time deal. All right, South Carolina. Let's talk about them real fast. Well, actually, we're not going to talk about South Carolina. What we're going to do is we're going to pick the new South Carolina. But before we do, if you're still watching this, just do me a favor, like the video, hit the ring notification, follow us on the social channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Follow me at Mr. Cole Thompson. That way the back and forth banner can continue to develop. South Carolina was probably one of the more surprise teams of 2024. And I mean that just in general in college football this year. They were able to go ahead and punch their ticket to a 9-3 season. On top of that, they found their quarterback of the future. And they also delivered a game to remember against South Carolina. And they were a dark horse to make the college football playoff. Nobody besides those out in Columbia believed that actually South Carolina was going to get the job done. And they nearly did. So who could be South Carolina in 2025? You know, the team that comes out of nowhere and we all say, damn, they actually have the gusto and the momentum and the belief in. They're going to be a dark horse to make it to the college football playoff. Well, Florida's got to be in that running. Absolutely, Florida does. If you look currently at the starting quarterbacks in college football, and you get to pick anyone from the SEC that you want to start your franchise with, your program, it really should be a two-team race for the long term. Lenore Sellers from South Carolina and DJ Lagway from Florida. That's it, because of what you've seen from the growth and the development. I'm not saying that Arch can't get there. I'm not saying you can't take Garrett Nussmeier for a season or that Nico won't be able to break on out. What I'm saying is those are the top two. They're returning 80% of their roster. They've done a good job of still developing the offensive line, and they now have a solid running back tandem, especially headlined by Jaden Baugh. Here's the part that's really interesting to me. You look at their schedule. They close out the year with a 3-game stretch that really is nerve-wracking. Georgia, at Ole Miss, Tennessee. Then they play Florida State. Florida State, for my money right now, I'm sorry, until I actually see it all unfold on the field, I'm not buying stock into them again. But you start off the year with games at LSU, at Miami, on the bye week, and then 3 straight Texas at Texas A&M, Mississippi State. How many of those do you think you can win? I see 5. I see 5 absolute victories in that stance. I see an LSU win. I see a Miami win. I see a win over Texas A&M, and I see a win over Mississippi State. I also see a win potentially over Georgia. I see a win over Ole Miss, and I see a win over Tennessee. And you own Tennessee. I might also add in, especially when you're in the swamp. So now all we're talking about is, hey, can you get past Texas? Can you not shoot yourself in the foot against maybe LSU? Can you find a way to get a win against Kentucky? Can you also find a way to get a win against Florida State? You do all that, 9-3, 10-2, it's right on the horizon. Missouri falls in this category for me right now. How many people are going to talk about Missouri going into 2025? Because when you look at Missouri currently on paper, they're not as spicy as a team. They're losing their starting quarterback. They're losing one of their star wide receivers. They're losing their secondary wide receiver in Theo Wees that didn't get enough credit during his time in Como. But here's the part that's really interesting. Look at the way their schedule bodes out. On top of the fact that they're not going to play anybody different besides Kansas this year, they get South Carolina at home early on in the season. They get a bye week to prepare for the Alabama game, a team that they lost to, and they get a bye week to prepare for the Texas A&M game, a team that they lost to. They then travel and play at Jordan-Hare at Vanderbilt before their second bye week. They also go travel to Gaylord, and they travel to Arkansas to close out the season. To me, depending on what we're going to get in Oklahoma and what we're going to get in Arkansas, when I look currently at the status right now of Missouri, how do you not believe in them? They're killing in the transfer portal. They're going to have one of the best defensive lines in college football, not just in terms of quality starters, but also depth. They went out and they brought in a brand new linebacker in Josiah Trotter with multiple years of eligibility. Ahmad Hardy is one of the better running backs that just joined the team from the group of 5 level. Kevin Coleman comes on in. He was a sleeper wide receiver out in Starkville last year. And just because if you don't need to trust your passing attack as much, you can put an emphasis on your run game with Bo Pabula, the quarterback that you just added from Penn State. You're not losing either of your coordinators, and now there are expectations actually out in Missouri for you to deliver performances that are rememberable. Oh, and by the way, all 3 games that you lost in 2024, they're all at home this year. And 2 of them you get a bye week to prepare for. So you may be sleeping on Missouri, but I'm not. And the final team I'm talking about, they're probably going to be slept on because of what they lost in talent, but I don't think that you can. It's Ole Miss. When are we going to learn that Ole Miss is not going to go away? Because they're not. Ole Miss has set a new standard out in college football where this is the expectations year in and year out. They will be in the forefront for a 10-win victory. They will be in the hunt for a top 10 finish and a college football playoff berth. Kind of like when we talk about with Missouri. Look at their schedule. LSU and Tulane back-to-back before a bye week. After that, they get to close out the year with a game against Mississippi State. They also have games against Georgia on the road, Oklahoma on the road, and South Carolina. South Carolina is going to be at home. You get a game against Florida. That's going to be at home. So 2 games that you thought maybe could have ended in your loss, I feel like it ended in a win. Austin Simmons showed you in just a small sample size that he fits the style of offense that they want to run underneath Lane Kiffin. They brought in really good transfer pieces. Maybe not at the same level as what we saw from Trey Harris and Walter Nolan and Key Lawrence, but they still added in dudes. And these are going to be players that will be plug-and-play additions for a team that has still, for my money, a very relaxed schedule. We're going to sleep on this team because of what they're losing, but we're not going to talk about enough of what they're gaining. This, again, is a very solid overall Ole Miss team. And an Ole Miss team that, let's be real, they have the buy-in. People want to go ahead and pay. And I don't mean pay in terms of, oh, they want to go pay to watch the Rebels play. No, they want to pay to go watch the Rebels win. And when you have that from your boosters, when you have that from your NIL collective to where you can match any single person on the market, all you got to do is make sure that you have the quarterback done. And Austin Simmons now opting out of baseball, that probably ends up benefiting him way more than ends up hurting somebody else. All right, before we get on out of here, I do want to talk about transfer portal players. So transfer portal, to me, it's always a blessing in disguise because you're adding in premier talent. Here's what I will say. There are going to be players that are not mentioned enough at the start of the transfer portal period. Right now, you'll hear about Casey Concepcion for Texas A&M. You'll hear about Eric Singleton going on over to Auburn. You'll hear about guys going to Alabama, like Cam Dewberry, the offensive lineman from Texas A&M, now joining forces with Kalen DeBoer. But they may not end up being the fixtures that we're talking about. Isaiah Bond had a solid year out in Austin, but Matthew Golden was the one that we were paying attention to. By the season's end, number 2 was the number 1 option out in the 40 acres. And to me, that's what I'm looking at here. These are players that I think right now, maybe we aren't talking enough about, but they could end up defining college football or at least the SEC in 2025. How about Rasul Faison, the running back from Utah State? He's now currently going to South Carolina. So South Carolina, for those of you that don't know, just hired a new offensive coordinator. His name is Mike Shula. Mike Shula worked with Cam Newton, and there's a lot of people that see some very similarities between Cam Newton and Lenore Sellers. Well, what did Cam Newton have to better his career very early on out in Carolina? Stable run game, solid tight end. They went and they added in Jordan Dingle, the tight end from Kentucky. They also just went and brought in Faison, who is coming off of an 800 rushing yard season with Utah State, led the Mountain West in yards after contact. He also was top 10 in rushing touchdowns in the Mountain West, and he's a really solid player with physicality. He wins with finesse. He's got some home run speed. So you're taking pressure off of your quarterback, kind of like you did this past year with Rocket Sanders. And he may not be the household name, the one like a Mekhi Hughes that went on over to Oregon from Tulane. But he is a guy that can at least make a lot of noise and be a stabilizer for your offense, especially while you're getting the younger guys implemented into your system. How about Arkansas's Omega Blake? Now, Omega Blake is a perfect fit for the style of offense that they want to run with Taylor Green. Because what does Taylor Green do? He uncorks footballs. He just goes inside and says, screw it, someone's down there. And 50 yards, it's either an interception or it's a touchdown pass. You know, Omega Blake led the country this past year in receiving yards per game. And on top of that, he also led it in yards per catch. 26.6 yards per play down in Charlotte. He's already had experience playing in the SEC. He is a vertical playmaker. This is a guy that you're going to say, run 2 routes for us. Run slants, run goes, use your speed to break up a play and find your way into the end zone for 6 points. It's a perfect fit for the style of offense that you want run with a guy like Taylor Green. And it's a perfect fit for Bobby Petrino to say, we're going to build the rest of the offense around you. We're going to have a guy that can play in the tight end slot. We're going to have a guy that can run the slot. We're going to have a player out of the backfield. But your job is just to get open and win with your straight line speed. If you can do that, we will find you the football. Watch as Omega Blake gets a win, at least for Arkansas, over a team they probably shouldn't. Texas A&M brought in Micah Riley, the tight end from Auburn. Now, a lot of you are saying, well, they brought in a lot of talent this offseason. They did. They brought in a lot of talent at wide receiver. They brought in a lot of talent at cornerback. They brought in a lot of talent on the defensive line. But the tight end position, to me, is such an implement one. And the reason I say that is because look at who's the offense coordinator. Colin Klein. Every single year when you go back and look at Kansas State, it was either the slot receiver or the tight end leading the team in receiving yards. I didn't like the tight end play this past year at Texas A&M. It needed to get better. Guy like Micah Riley, guess what he can do? He can come on in, be a consistent playmaker. He can win in the slot. He can win in the short to intermediate game. He can be your replacement for Donovan Green. And more importantly, he can continue to move the sticks. You want a guy like Marcel Reed to get comfortable in the system. The best way to make a guy comfortable in a system, give him a security blanket. Tight ends are that. That's exactly what they need to be utilized as. And when they can run certain routes, it may be 3 or 4, but when they have an identity like that, you're in a good spot. And more importantly, it takes a lot of pressure off your quarterback to have to make those deep shots down the field when they don't feel comfortable doing that. Kentucky brought in Marquise Grace, the South Dakota defensive lineman. I did a video on him if you want to go ahead and check it out. It's somewhere on the YouTube link, so go ahead and click that one and give it a thumbs up. But in that game, he reminds me a lot of Jared Verse. So when Jared Verse was coming out of UAlbany, everyone wanted Verse. Everyone said, this is a guy, All-American for the Great Danes that can be a difference maker from the get-go. And eventually he was. And he decided to go ahead and come back for another year at Florida State and let his team do an undefeated season. Now, I'm not saying that that's what Grace is going to be, but Grace has 18 and a half sacks. He has 26 tackles for loss in the last 2 years. He was an FCS All-American this past season for the Yotes. And this is a defensive line that needed to get a ton more talent. They brought in the Washington State transfer kid. They brought in the Ohio transfer kid. They brought in some good offensive pieces, but a guy like Grace is supposed to be the one that stabilizes your roster. Don't be shocked if he's top 10 in sacks. Don't be shocked if he's top 10 in pressure rates. He's working with Mark Stoops, who the one thing I will say, death taxes, Stoops knows how to get the best out of defensive play. He may end up being a name that we talk about in such a prominent light. And by the way, don't think that he was only going to Kentucky because that was the one SEC school that wanted him. Ole Miss went after him. LSU went after him. Mississippi State went after him. South Carolina went after him. Florida went after him. There were a ton of schools that said the kid from the FCS is good enough to play SEC football. And a guy that is actually going to Mississippi State, as previously mentioned, Fluff Bothwell. Bothwell is the ideal fit for the style of offense that you want to run underneath Jeff Lebby. This is a dude that when you put him on in, he is going to make noise. He was great last season as the secondary runner at South Alabama, over 800 rushing yards, finished with 9 touchdown runs. He also had a really good point after contact approach. He was phenomenal when it came to the short to intermediate game. He's got some home run speed and he has eligibility. 3 more years of eligibility, and he's going to go be playing in a Jeff Lebby system. So many people talk about the passing attack, what the passing attack does. You guys realize that this is a veer and shoot style offense where they want to run it to set up the vertical passing game. This is a running back, similar to what you have with Davin Booth, that can come on in and be that bruiser, be that guy to stabilize the system that you want for Jeff Lebby. And then you get to see the vision of Jeff Lebby. I didn't think Jeff Lebby was going to do much in year one. I don't know why people were overexcited for Jeff Lebby. He had nothing really to work with. What I was excited for is that when he established his culture, you knew what style of offense you were going to see. I don't know if the win total is going to be any better. What I will tell you is I do think that the total of consistency on the ground is going to be better. 2 more for you. Missouri's Ahmad Hardy. Let me ask you guys something. Do you know anything about Ahmad Hardy? No, if you don't, I'll save you the trouble. Guy was top 15 in rushing yards this past year. On top of that, he also averaged 5.7 yards per play, and he was a backbone for Bryant Vincent's squad with the Warhawks. He was a freshman, which means he has 3 more years of eligibility. This is one of the more sleeper moves that I start believing, okay, Missouri's not messing around. Missouri actually means business. Missouri's going to do everything in its power to put itself in a good system to where 10 wins is the new standard. This is a guy that is going to prove to you time and time again, hey, give me 20 carries a game, I'll get you 115 yards and in the end zone twice. This is a guy that can be effective out of the backfield as a pass catcher. And this is a guy that just kind of fits that Eli Drinkwitz mentality of, yeah, I came from a school like ULM, and I know that Alabama wasn't going to go after me, and I know that Missouri didn't look at me that way, and I knew that the state school didn't even want me. But I'll go play for the Tigers. I'll just go to Como, and I'll kill it. And I'll be exactly everything that was asked for of me, and I'll probably be a reason why Missouri is being talked about as a college football playoff contender next year. Lastly, and certainly not least, Ole Miss's edge, Prince Will Unmanly-Ellen. They just had his brother. And by the way, there's a proof of concept. You talk to NFL scouts, even though the production didn't match the price range, a lot of people love him in the NFL. They think that he can be a difference maker from the get-go as a third down pass rusher. Well, his little brother's coming on in. And I can tell you something. If you watch the way that he played last season at Nebraska in a limited role, imagine him working with the same defense that turned his big brother into a standout defensive lineman for the next level, it should give you goosebumps down in Oxford. It should make you feel excited because this is a guy that you got for 2 years, and he is going to be your enforcer coming off the edge. He is going to be the reason why maybe Ole Miss, despite not having a Jackson Dart-esque led quarterback, despite not having a superstar wide receiver number 1, they're going to have their dudes. And the dudes are going to deliver on Saturdays. All right, so we've been going for over 50 minutes. So real quickly, if you haven't already, just do me a favor. Like the video, hit the ring notification, subscribe to the channel. We are so close to 20,000 subs. The ultimate goal is to get to 20,000 subs before we end the college football season. Make sure that also you're following us on all the social channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at SEC Unfiltered. Follow me at Mr. Cole Thompson. Check out all of our great work found at secunfiltered.com. And of course, whatever you do, make sure that you start your day off by always watching SEC Unfiltered. We're presented by FANDUEL. Go visit FANDUEL.com, promo code SECU to get a $300 in bonus bets with your first $5 lineup. I'll be back next week. I have content ideas. We're going into the offseason. This is the fun time for us. Also, make sure that you go ahead and message me on Twitter or follow me on Twitter. That way, we can start getting your opinions in the show. Because ultimately, that's what this is really in the offseason. It's all about you. It's all about me. It's all about us building this community together. But for Chris Phillips, for Dave Shoemate, I am Cole Thompson. I will see you guys next week. And remember, stay blessed.